Hello everyone, my name is Haesun Kim. I'm a professor at Georgia Tech, and here we have a Nuwan Jayasena. This is from AMD. He happy to agree to give an interview at Micro.
Thank you for inviting me to do this as well.
Yeah, thank you. So these are more questions to try to help our students and to give a more of the industry perspective. So I guess the questions are a little bit unordered, and we'll ask the first questions. So when you look for students, what do you look for when you're hiring interns or full-time?
Sure. So I'm within the research group at AMD, so I will speak from the research perspective. And it's not fundamentally that different from academic research in many ways, but one of the key things we look for is a broad background, particularly from a systems perspective. So being able to look at realistic workloads and understand where the bottlenecks are in the system, including the software stack, looking at both the high-level architecture as well as the low-level implications. Obviously, none of us are experts across all of that, but I think to the extent that the researchers understand the overall systems implications of the specific areas they're working on, that's a very big plus in our mind. Even if it's not your area, you need to be able to reason about the adjacent areas. If I change something in the microarchitecture, how does that affect other microarchitectural blocks? How does that affect the software ecosystem? What do you need to change in the operating system? What workloads will use that improvement? Being able to reason about that and understand that and work from a real software, from an applications perspective, I think is a very important set of skills for us. The other thing I would add is, certainly speaking for our group, we tend to be a very entrepreneurial organization, meaning we rely on the researchers to come up with and identify sort of what are the next set of challenges we should be solving. Look further ahead beyond the roadmap of real products and where should we be focusing our efforts on, where should we be exploring, and what questions should we be asking and answering. So we have a big emphasis on relying on individual researchers to kind of be the source of a lot of that forward-looking thinking and identification of directions, look for ways to engage with the product teams. How do we get research results into products? That's not always a straightforward process, but there are a number of ways which we follow to do that. But for the most part, we rely on individual researchers to take the initiative and be able to drive that. That's another very important thing that we look for in a researcher, beyond the technical abilities, being able to communicate and engage with the product teams and drive research results into real products and solve the hard problems that we should be looking at.
Oh, thank you. Very good. Thank you. So that leads to me the next question. How do you select research questions or project, especially if you assuming an industry has a little bit of limitations because of the constraints, but if you have some more freedom?
Sure. I think the trade-offs in industry research are similar in many ways, but also slightly different, as you alluded to. To be honest, the goal of an industry research organization is to ultimately drive the products forward, to improve the products and solve the challenges beyond kind of the currently foreseen products. So in some sense, in many ways, the research has to be aligned with the interest of the company, so that has a little bit of a constraint. But in a lot of cases, a company like AMD has a very broad product portfolio, and almost any problem that you can envision within the architecture domain as well as related areas is relevant for at least one of our product teams. So we have quite a bit of freedom to go after a broad research portfolio, and AMD Research really does go after a broad research portfolio. But in terms of specifically selecting individual problems, I would say there are multiple different ways of approaching that. One of the obvious ways is if there's a problem that one of our, that we expect our customers are going to face, that's certainly a domain that we would want to go after. Or if there are particular areas that we anticipate our products having to, or challenges we anticipate our product lines having to overcome in the foreseeable future, those are areas that we would expect the researchers to focus on. So in many ways, those tend to drive a lot of the research directions that we choose. And of course, we're informed by what the research community identifies, or more broadly speaking, both academic and industry research identifies as emerging challenges that we have to address. Beyond that, I would say the flip side of industry research is we do have direct access to the product development organizations, and that has a number of different advantages that come with it as well. Obviously, you have the expertise and the I would say the details that you need to do the research readily available. That's one of the big advantages that go with industry research. And similarly, there's a satisfaction that comes with seeing your research results get into a real product. So it's a pluses and minuses, slightly different trade-offs. But broadly speaking, I think it's not fundamentally different in terms of how we go about identifying what the viable and interesting and promising research directions are.
Okay, thank you. What are the measures of success in industry?
Sure, this is probably one of the areas where industry research is different from academic research. As I alluded to earlier, ultimately the goal is to improve the products. And so influence on real products and getting research results into real products is an important metric in industry research. That doesn't mean you have to work on products, right? We certainly don't, as researchers, we often don't work directly on the products. So we're not looking at necessarily influencing the next product or even the next product. Sometimes we look at very long-term research directions that may take many, many years to get into a product. But it has to be aligned with products. And as I alluded to earlier, having that alignment with products and having that path to influence a product, not necessarily near term, but at some point in the evolution of the product roadmap, is an important aspect of industry research. I think the other area where industry research differs is in the aspect of IP. Metrics in industry differ from academia.
I see. And last question, how can you improve academia-industry collaboration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in general, industry research teams do always like to work with academia. I think we look at the academic community as kind of an extension of ourselves in many ways. As I alluded to earlier, we like to publish, we like to engage with academic community. So those are ways we build relationships. I think direct relationships with specific research teams is one of the approaches we use. So working closely with specific researchers at specific universities. In some cases, we have very close relationships with funding research centers, those sorts of approaches. We also have a variety of other venues where we try to engage with academia. Internships is one of those approaches where students will come in, work with us for a few months, and oftentimes we have longer term relationships with those students when they go back. We would often set up an NDA and continue to work with those students. Similarly, we have with faculty, we have visiting scholar arrangements. You know that you've been a visiting scholar at AMD yourself. So I think those are various ways that we try to develop relationships with academia. In terms of improving those relationships, I think one of the important ways I think we can go about that is to perhaps collaborate in areas where we may have certain ideas about what the next perhaps couple of generations of products might look like, and beyond, looking beyond that, academia has a much better track record of looking very long term and looking at very exploratory ideas, and industry can do a good, or hopefully be good partners in providing kind of the background information necessary for academia to go after those longer term products or longer term ideas based around where we see the low level technologies perhaps evolving and those sorts of areas. So I think being able to formulate those research directions where academia has an important role to play, but also the industry partners bring some value to the conversation. I think that's an important way for us to look at research challenges and perhaps establish long-term research directions that are beneficial to both parties.
I see. Oh, that concludes our interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you again for having me.